Everybody, fascinating couple of talks so far. I've learned a few things. Key amongst them is that we've got someone called McKinsey to blame for 100 years of accounting hell, so that's mental note. I'm going to talk about a little bit about Deutsche Bank, but I'm going to talk more generally about enterprise agility. Chris said a couple of things that really resonated and are relevant to this topic in his talk. He talked about organizational capability. He talked about people being blocked by the system. So this talk isn't going to be a magic recipe to success, 10 steps to follow and everything will be fine. It's going to hone in on some things that I think are necessary but not sufficient if you want to achieve enterprise agility and unlock your teams. So the focus is very much on the enterprise. And it's going to start with something that might seem a little bit controversial. For me, I think agility at a team level is largely a solved-for problem. So by that, I don't mean that every team that I go and meet is, this nirvana of a constant flow of small features, perfectly tested, delighting the customer every half an hour. But more and more, when I go to see really mature agile teams at the team level, in the bank that I work at or in others, you see very common patterns emerging. But at the enterprise level, unlocking these things and achieving this at scale, I think it's less solved for. So that's where this 20 minutes is going to focus. So mandatory stock slides just about the scale of the organization. Any tier one bank or large organization would have similar stats. We're present in a large number of countries. We have many thousands of employees. The real purpose of this, I think, is that the things that banks do, they obviously matter. It's always a good way to ingratiate yourself with a group of people by starting with, I work for a bank these days. But the things that we do matter. So control is obviously important. Technology drives everything that we do. We have no products that we sell or services that we offer that aren't in some way powered by technology. And if that technology is down, salaries don't get paid, people can't purchase goods. And people's lives are impacted. So clearly control is important. And we're working in a very interesting time at the moment. There are a number of trends affecting not just our industry, but everybody else's industries, which we need to be able to respond to. The increasing regulatory requirements, which for good reason have been happening over the last 10 years. The continued evolution of customer expectations around technology capabilities at the point of interaction, through fantastic innovations in consumer technology over the last 10 or 15 years, the bar is now incredibly high. And all companies have to reach that bar. Everyone's got their own favorite story about companies becoming obsolete by not keeping pace with the times. My favorite one is probably Nokia. Hands up who had a Nokia phone at some point. Yeah, pretty much everybody. In 2007, Nokia had 52% of the world's market share in mobile phone handsets. 1 in every 2 people on the entire planet had a Nokia phone. In 2012, that number was less than 3%. 5 years, entire business destroyed by not keeping up with its competition. So the threats are real, but the need for control is not optional. It's ever present. What do I do? So my job is head of development engineering. That's broadly 2 things for the bank. So I own the bank's processes and governance and compliance around how we deliver software change. So the things that we need to do to demonstrate good control of our technology change capability. It's clearly important in the environment they operate. And then I look after developer tooling, the kind of enterprise tools. So thinking source code repositories and continuous integration infrastructure and those types of things. And it's important those 2 things sit together, and that's going to be a large part of what I'm going to talk about. My background is software engineering. So I spent 20 years building software mainly for banks and then running software teams and departments and divisions. And now the job is essentially to work across the enterprise, helping us be better at delivering technology. And a big part of that talks exactly to Chris's point about getting the system lined up to help and support teams moving in that direction. Rather than inhibit them. Those 2 things have to work in consort. So this talk is about just a few things that I've witnessed and experienced, not just at my current employer, but previous employers, that seem to be a pattern across the industry that are helping on that journey. So the first thing is about actually trying to make doing the right thing also the easy thing. Who here's heard of something called Conways Law? Show of hands, quite a few of you. Yeah, I expect that in this sort of audience. Conways Law is something that really is usually talked about in the context of architecture. It says an architecture will form the shape of the organizational structure that was in place when it was created. So if you have a front office technology team and a middle office technology team and a back office technology team, you'll end up with front office systems and middle office systems and back office systems. And actually the thing that they're trying to do is get a trade from one end to the other. It's one flow of value, but the architecture will reflect that organizational structure. It doesn't just apply to architecture though, it applies to process as well. So if you have different parts of your organization, which in any large-scale organization is inevitable, looking at different types of risk, different types of control points, information security risk, disaster recovery, monitoring, alerting, et cetera, then you end up with many, many processes that teams have to follow, implemented in many, many places. And actually, all of those processes might individually look sound and reasonable and sane, and then you look at the person trying to work them all, trying to be compliant with all of them. And actually, from that person's perspective, sometimes that job can be a little bit difficult or overwhelming. We invest a lot of time in making technology for our customers and making technology for our businesses. One of the trends that I'm seeing that's helping is to invest a bit of time in making technology that helps people to manage their infrastructure, to bring those things together. So the enterprise point there is about trying making the right thing also the easy thing. And part of that is about moving away from paper-based compliance. I think when people look at control and people look at agility, they're often treated as somehow opposite. So I can either have lots and lots and lots of control, or I can go really, really quickly, but I can't have both. When I met my wife, she was driving a 1967 Volkswagen Beetle, beautiful car. You'd be driving along the road. You could do this with the steering wheel. It would keep straight as a die. Wouldn't move an inch to the left or the right. You would press the brakes. It was more kind of a suggestion to the wheels that maybe at some point we might need to slow down because something's coming up in front of us. So that control system there never really enabled me to want to drive that car very fast, as beautiful as it was. I drive a German car now. I bought it before I moved to Deutsche Bank, so no correlation there. I drive an Audi. The steering's fine, the brakes are fine, and it enables me to go 71 miles an hour down the motorway and know that I'm going to be in control of that. So control enables agility, it enables flexibility if it's done in the right way. And so this kind of notion that control can be evidenced by someone filling in a document to say that they've done something, I think that maybe can be true at the level of an individual person or a team. I filled in this to say that yes, a source code review was done, or yes, my testing was done. But when you're talking about many thousands of people, any manual process has an error rate. And what you're looking at is trying to create an environment in which you have consistency of evidence. And so taking evidence of control from the tools that people use to do their jobs, rather than from documents that suggest that control has been done, is something that both unlocks agility, but also is a stronger and more consistent demonstration of a control being met. But it requires investment. So automated compliance brings consistency with efficiency, is the message there. Investment in platforms is important. When I talk about platforms here, what I'm talking about is, we have many, many regulations that we need to meet. We have a very strong and healthy audit function that makes sure that across the bank we're providing an environment which is safe and sound for our customers. Some of that regulation requires quite a lot of reading and consuming and understanding before it's implemented. Just the laws around data retention are something, for something like source code, is something that you don't want 1,000 people to have to read and understand and implement. You want a very small number of people to read that and implement platforms that other people can use so that you know that you're compliant and so that they can focus on their job, which is creating great products for their customers. Wherever it's possible to commoditize the implementation of things like security around penetration testing, authentication, entitlements, the myriad of other things that may suffer from translation error if you don't build them in central platforms, those investments pay off and enable agility at the team level and shift the cognitive load interpreting those regulations to small teams in the middle. It's a trend that I've seen for some time, but it's something that with cloud computing is really going to provide much bigger benefits than it has over the next sort of 5 years. Identify risks early. So this is something that I've seen historically, this kind of interplay between control functions and people delivering change at large organizations. So if I work in a control function, my job is to make sure that whatever risk that I'm mitigating doesn't turn into an issue. So I'm going to stand probably somewhere near the end of the development process, and I'm going to hold up my checklist, and when someone gets to me, I'm going to go through my checklist, and if someone hasn't done something, then I catch it, and I've done a good job because I've now made sure that risk doesn't turn into an issue. There's a problem with that dynamic, though, in that those risks sometimes can get identified so late in the process that now it's actually very expensive, difficult, time-consuming to actually address them, especially if a delivery has a hard mandated date, as much of what we do does. And identifying a risk late in the process is too late. There was a story on the BBC recently about our meteorite early warning system detecting an asteroid that, had it have hit a major populated zone, would have caused quite a lot of devastation, and we picked it up 3 days after it skimmed the surface of the atmosphere. An early warning system is only useful if it provides information to you early enough to actually do something active about it. So this leads to, then you ask the question, well, then how do you do those things? You only have a finite number of people, and you have a lot of change coming through. So there's a couple of things in there. One of them is cultural, and one of them can be supported by automation. The piece around automation is something, a trend which people talk about, a move towards continuous automated compliance. So rather than saving those checks till late in the day, injecting automation where it's possible to pick up the likely presence of an issue much, much earlier in the development life cycle. Many of you will have seen the cost curve, the exponential cost curve of the cost of addressing an issue depending on which stage it's found in the project development life cycle. If you fix something on a whiteboard when you're scoping something out at the beginning, it's very, very cheap to rub out a line and draw it differently on a whiteboard. If then it's in production, it's very, very expensive to fix, and it goes all the way through. So automated continuous compliance helps developers and engineers and analysts keep on top of risk early in the process rather than waiting for those check gates. But there's another element to it as well, which is cultural. The cultural element to this is around a change in the mindset of what those control teams are there to do. So a shift away from people standing at the end whose job it is to make sure that none shall pass, towards teams engaging at the outset of pieces of work and working hand in hand with the teams to say, we share a responsibility here to make sure that these risks are mitigated by the time this goes into production. We're still going to have those checks. We're still going to have those gates. We still operate in many markets for many customers and are systemically important. We need to have those checks. But if we get to the point that we get to that checklist and something isn't checked, then we've both missed something. So there's a shared responsibility, shared accountability to get to the end and make sure those things are mitigated by them. This is a big cultural change in some firms and for some teams, and requires the kind of leadership change that Chris was talking about earlier. Use of measurement is something that I see, and over the last 20 years I've seen far too infrequently, real use of measurement. I see tacit use of some kind of input measures. I see various companies will talk at various conferences about the percentage of teams or systems or projects that were agile 2 years ago and the percentage of projects that are now agile, and it kind of doesn't feel like a meaningful objective measure to me. Measurement is something to be really careful with. You can have all manner of dysfunction if you measure the right things, and gamification is something that can shift organizations great leaps, in the right direction, or great leaps in the wrong direction. But measurement is critical if people are going to understand their process, and not just it makes me smile every time I get a CV that talks about my project's delivered on time and on budget. Okay, on time and on budget. Those things are not unimportant, but did it solve the problem? What was the impact that it had? Measurable. Did it move the business forward? And how do you know? How was the efficiency of your system as you were delivering that change? What was the safety of that process? And how do you know? How do you tell? So measurement is something at an enterprise level that can be extraordinarily powerful for creating those shifts and for gamifying people. No one wants to be at the bottom of the leaderboard next to their peers on anything that senior managements care about. But at the enterprise level, and remember this is not team level, this is enterprise level, you can't focus on 20 measures because people can't consume them. You need to focus on a small number of things that will matter. And depending on your organization, they may differ. Reward good performance is something that I don't think gets talked about enough. I use this as an opportunity to put my 3-year-old on here. Now I see him looming over me. It's kind of a terrifying vision of what the future is going to hold in 13 or 14 years. But the point here is, so input measures are not unimportant. They can be predictors of good or bad outcomes, but it's the outcomes that you're interested in. It's the outcomes that you want. And if all of the input measures are correct, high levels of automated testing, fully automated release and deploy processes, frequent releases to production, all of these things, and you're not having the impact of the business that you intended, or those releases still result in instability in a production environment, then something is wrong. And those types of streams, the teams or programs are going to need to have some special attention given to them. But for teams that are achieving those right outcomes, for teams that have history of making change that matters to their business, of very low instability for the changes that they make, then it's important to incentivize and reward the good, rather than just this kind of culture of picking up and punishing the bad and the people that create the high severity incidents, etc., when those things go wrong. Because you want to enable this uplifting capability across your organizations and say that if you do these things, then some of the bureaucracy and some of the ways in which the system, as Chris said, has got in front of you before will start to melt away. It's start of this transition of trust and accountability into the teams. So just one final point on this. So when you're looking at a team level and you're coaching a team to try and achieve greater agility, then you can be very specific and nuanced. You can take time, you can look at their context, their relationship with their business, how work flows through their system, how they're organized, etc. And you can give them some very kind of deliberate and detailed coaching and hopefully move them in a good direction. When you're looking at an enterprise, when you're looking at 99,000 people or 50 or 10,000 people or more, you can't have that level of nuance. You can't, sit there and talk through detailed principles, values, philosophies to every person individually about how these things work. That middle that Chris talked about, that are so influential, alignment at that level is really important. And to get alignment at that level, when you're talking about many thousands of people, what you need there is simple, crisp, clear messages to help people understand the direction that you want to move the organization in. So if you can move into a world where everyone can kind of close their eyes and draw an outline of the kind of picture that you're trying to create, the kind of world that you're trying to move towards, then you can create aligned outcomes. The people that run the processes can start to understand the context in which you're driving, and so rethink their structures, their implementations, their working practices, their cultures, their methods, their way of organizing around that outcome that you're looking to provide. The tagline that we've latched onto at Deutsche Bank is ideas to production safely in a day. I did have one team say to me, but what if I don't want to release my system every day? You don't have to, it's not a mandate. But if you can create a world in which it's possible to get software change from a genuinely good small idea on the train on the way into work in the morning and get it into production that evening in a way that's safe, measurably safe, then I think you can start to create an organization that can cope with those challenges on the side at the beginning of the talk. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.